All right. With that, I'd like to call the Business and Governance Committee meeting to order and start with non-agenda public comment. Do we have any non-agenda public comment?
No public comment.
Then let's move on to new business. First action item is staff's recommendation to approve the 2016 board and committee meeting schedule, and I'd call on Johnny Tran.
Yeah, good morning. Before you is the proposed calendar for the schedules of meetings for calendar year 2016. We ask that you approve it and clear your calendars.
And just for the record, this follows the schedule we've had in the previous year. Is that correct?
Yes. As far as the week that the meetings are
There's
on.
only one unusual thing. Ordinarily, the board meeting is the second Friday of the odd-numbered months. In November 2016, the second Friday is Veterans Day. So November of 16, the board meeting is actually the first Friday. That's the one unusual timing thing.
Okay.
All right. Any discussion? And then may we have a motion? Motion's been made by Dick Wilkins, seconded by Ed Kitrosser.
Ready to vote.
Votes are in. And the motion passes unanimously. That brings us to the second item, staff's recommendation to revise Divisions 7 and 8 of the board rules. And again, Mr. Tran.
We're wrapping up our triennial review of the policies, rules, and procedures of the board. So we're on Division 7 and 8, which pertain to disability retirement, re-examination process. There are several recommended changes, the majority of them being housekeeping matters. One substantive matter that we had a good discussion at the Disability Committee meeting was to refer anytime at the administrative level, Sandra Clausen level, there's a conflict in the evidence, to refer that to hearing automatically as opposed to waiting to bring that before the Disability Committee and board. And the recommendation, we make the recommendation for two reasons. One, it's efficient in that the board historically for my 5 years here has never disagreed with that recommendation, so it's been automatic, and we'd also like to get these resolved faster for the benefit of the members. With that, I'll take any questions.
And it was passed unanimously by the Disability Committee.
Thank you.
There wouldn't be any off-ramp under that scenario where the board or someone could use discretion to pull an item and say, no, we want to talk, the board wants to talk about this before it goes to fact determination.
Not as
setting him up with that.
That was part of the discussion of the Disability Committee. As proposed, that would not be the case. Other than a member or anyone could always do a non-public comment, non-agenda comment.
Okay.
There certainly would be an option if staff's recommending or an approval or a denial for the board to then say we want that to nonetheless go to an adjudicator. That could certainly happen and has happened.
All right. No one else has any comment or question. Let's proceed with a motion. I made the motion. Dick Wilkin has seconded the motion.
Ready to vote. Our votes are in.
And the motion passes unanimously. Third item on this morning's agenda, staff's recommendation to revise the. No, wait a minute. We still have further. We have further revisions. Sorry.
I'm
Still
sorry.
up. Right.
That's it.
For item
That was up.
item
all for
2,
that
we're
item.
all done.
All right. So staff's recommendation to revise the audit committee charter.
Yes, this was also discussed at the Audit Committee charter and passed unanimously. Staff is recommending the audit charter be revised to give some flexibility to who can be the chair and the term for that position. So currently it can only be an independent, non-board member, and we're asking that that committee charter be changed to allow any member of the audit committee to be chair, and instead of serving 2 years to serve 1 with the option of being able to serve an additional term. And I think that flexibility will be helpful to finding a new chair. Also keeping with the best practice of making sure the audit committee stays independent, in that we still have 3 independent committee members.
Any discussion? All right. We'll need a motion. Kale Broad has made the motion. Ed Katrosser has provided the second.
Ready to vote. All votes are in.
Motion passes unanimously. Brings us to item 4 on the agenda, Ted LaSalvia, on staff's recommendation to approve SDCERS as a defined contribution investment option for the city of San Diego.
As Ted's getting set up, I just wanted to make a couple introductory comments here. The agenda line item and the subject header of the memo says approve us as a defined contribution option. The actual motion wording is to authorize us to approach the city with the anticipated costs and legal responsibilities. So we're really just looking for the board's concurrence that we need to get this in front of the city to get them to weigh in on things. And I'm going to have Ted go through more of that in a minute. This isn't really the one and only chance for the board, our board, to be weighing in on whether this is a good idea or not. And it's been a while since we've done an update, and I thought it might be helpful to just kind of refresh from a high level, what is it that's really being anticipated here? So the city operates 4 defined contribution plans for their members, and many retirees also have their money in there. There is a separate board from this one. There is a defined contribution board of the city comprised of 5 members. 3 of the members are in that position by virtue of their office, which includes the city's risk management director, the city treasurer, and the retirement administrator. So I actually sit on that board. There are 2 elected members of the defined contribution board, and that board meets quarterly, and they have outside investment counsel that advises them. They have the city attorney's office that acts as their general counsel on the board, and they have the fiduciary responsibility for ensuring that there is a representative lineup of funds that are vetted before they are ever offered up to any members. So the city has approximately 15 different funds that they make available to defined contribution members, which again are vetted by this defined contribution board. We take a look, much like we do at SDCERS, at how respective funds have done, make assessments as to whether they're performing or not. Occasionally we make a recommendation to revise one of those funds. Wells Fargo is the third-party administrator who coordinates all of that work. So if there's a new fund that's to be added, like we are envisioning SDCERS to become one of those potentially 15 funds, it would be the defined contribution board that would vet whether we're an appropriate fund lineup to be introduced. And that board would work with Wells Fargo to make sure that all the plan communications are sent out to members advising them of the fund option. And then again, Wells Fargo would be the administrator. So that's what's really been envisioned here. This request came to me from the city chief operating officer last fall saying, would you look into this and advise us as to whether this makes sense? So we have been spending some time, primarily time, not money, investigating this so far. We don't have the authority to spend money to make this thing happen. But in that time, which is Ted's what he's going to go through, he'll let you know what we've been doing this far. So we've gone about as far as we can go without spending money, or at least getting some city buy-in on this. So we just wanted to provide you with an update, get your concurrence that this needs to be formally brought to the city to have them work with us on figuring out, do we want to go forward or not. So with that, hopefully I didn't say everything that you were going to say, Ted, right? So you've got more that you can cover.
A little more detail, but I think Mark, succinctly put it together in a very good way. As he mentioned, the process that actually started in communications beginning in the fall. I didn't begin with this until after the end of the calendar year. This began with an initial meeting with the City of San Diego's Risk Management Department, the City Attorney's Office, Wells Fargo, our investment group, myself and Mark. at a meeting at the Risk Management Office to kind of discuss some of our initial questions that we had related to the process. The issue here is we're not administering a DC plan. We don't propose to do so. We are just, as we pointed out, being an investment vehicle that would be alongside the DB plan assets. There would be nothing unique with respect to the DC plan. It would be folded into our existing asset allocation model. Investments would do nothing different. They would continue on with the board-approved investment policy. What would end up happening, at least in theory for us, is that we would be receiving funds from the City of San Diego to invest for DC plan members in the same methodology that we do for the DB plan. The way that we would identify those items would be to allocate that amount of money to the DC plan and then allow a pro rata share of all investment-related expenses without regard to where the dollars actually come from in its current allocation method. We use something called a plan accounting for our investment expense allocations. So in the memo, you'll notice I have a number of about 45 basis points, and that's been traditionally our investment expense load. That is just the investment expenses, so you could kind of assume that for every dollar of DC plan investment, they would share in 45 basis point allocation of our investment expenses. As I went through this process, I had to come up with certain process tasks, like what are we going to do, what will the city do. It wasn't meant to dictate to the city their steps, but it's more or less our way of identifying them. So I have a task list, and then there's an actual operational steps that will be further detailed within this task list. I needed to identify any direct costs. I also needed to identify potential variable costs or reoccurring costs in the future. So the memo basically dictates that. The first step was this meeting on January 29th. As you know well, there were changes in the risk management office. We then revisited this again in the June timeframe with State Street Bank on our side to determine, could they do this for us? Could they do this for us at a reasonable cost? So I spent the time trying to accumulate and identify potential direct costs. Those direct costs are as listed on page number 2 as initial startup costs. We also had a conversation, actually multiple conversations with Ice Miller. Back when the process first started in the fall, Ice Miller gave us like a 40-page punch list, but they were under the impression that perhaps we were going to be administering a DC plan, which is not the case. We had them come back to us with a revised punch list, and then we then further had them come back to us a third time with really who is responsible for what items on the punch list. And each time we'd gotten more of our questions answered. At the time we got the third revision, we had them put dollar values associated with the various estimates for items that we would require them to do because either A, we didn't have the particular expertise to do so, and we wanted somebody with that expertise to actually help us with the documentation. Ice Miller had done so. We have listed the various costs there. Without really going into detail, I think I would open it up to any questions you might have on those particular document or amounts listed for Ice Miller.
Can you just go over one more time?
Sure.
That we would not be administering a fund. We would be a fund option?
Yes. So the administration of the DC plan remains with the City of San Diego. Plan documents, any legal requirements to qualify as a DC plan would remain with the City of San Diego. What they're doing is they're just offering us as another investment option, similar to like a Vanguard mutual fund. But because we are not subject to ERISA laws, we don't need to do the same type of prospectus disclosure that, say, an SEC-registered investment fund would need to do.
Next in the queue is actually Dick.
I support I did not support the original thing to approve this. I think it's far premature at this point, but I do support the way it's been modified, the recommendation. My comments, and I've talked to Mark on the phone a little bit today, were that I feel strongly that the board has a fiduciary responsibility to thoroughly vet this and to understand how it impacts the advantages, disadvantages to the system, to the members, to our sponsors, for going forward with what I regard as a kind of a one-off. This is a very untraditional role for us to play as an investment fund, if you will. And so I would urge staff to come to us at each meeting with a status report. One of the things we haven't done is we've been given oral briefings about this. Until I spoke to Mark on the phone, I didn't even really understand our role in this. And I think our members and our stakeholders need to understand what we're talking about. So I would urge prior to the next meeting that we put the concept, the ideas on paper so that there is a description of what it is we're talking about, what our role would be, and so forth, and the description of how we're going to proceed. I would also recommend that we ask all of our major advisors, whether it's fiduciary or investment advisors and so forth, tell them what we're considering, and see if they have, I'm not looking for definitive studies, but see if they have any issues that we think we might not have thought of, that we need to think through and discuss, any red flags that we need to study before we commit. As we proceed, I see this proceeding in stages, and we need to do a thorough job because it's not a role that we or anybody else really has done. Mark said that he's aware that Washington State apparently is doing this, and maybe there's some others that we can learn from in terms of how they do it. I don't want us to naively go into this and think, well, this is just, they're just going to give us their money and we have no concerns or obligations, and we need to look at whether or not we have any liabilities as a result of becoming a fund. How do we make sure that we recoup our cost? How do we make sure that staff time that is necessary to do whatever we're going to have to do is identified and that we're reimbursed for it? And importantly, that our members are not going to have their service levels diminished as a result of taking this on. I don't think they will, but I think we need to identify that and have it thoroughly discussed. And I would also like to request that we, after a agreement is fleshed out and negotiated with the city sponsor, that we have a chance to, as a board, review the specific agreement before we present it formally to the city. I don't mean before you negotiate it, but before it's adopted. In other words, I'm not comfortable with us giving you the ability to go off and execute, negotiate and execute. I'd like this board to have a chance to thoroughly review it. Thanks.
Ed? Oh, no, Carol, Jim. What? No, Ed. Sorry.
Two questions. One, from the research you've done so far, have you identified any downside risks from SDCERS standpoint by going ahead with this?
There's a good paragraph, not so much for SDCERS. As we pointed out, we can't use it. This is like a concrete wall. We cannot use DB plan assets. We cannot put them at risk, meaning that if for some reason DC plan assets are not sufficient to pay for those expenses, those direct expenses, because we start off at day one with zero, right? So the idea is that we need to approach the city with those very facts, and we need those costs covered. It may not make sense, and that's one of the caveats put on page 2, given the basis point structure, because I know, being a DC plan member myself, I pay very close attention to the expense load on my investment choices. One of the things that we noticed for both Washington State and Missouri State, Mosers, that their expense load, their basis point calculation, is quite high in relation to other DC plan options. The question is, why would you do that? And so we point out that it may not make sense given the cost load. We know for sure that the 45 basis point calculation will be there regardless of how large the portfolio becomes. There will be direct costs related to myself, finance, and legal, because we have the exact same questions you have, Mr. Olkin. I worry about things like liability. We want to ensure we cover all of our legal basis. We definitely want to identify costs and then talk about what happens when we have those costs that arise that no one had thought of. So those will obviously be discussion points with the City of San Diego.
Isn't it clear that if there were ever an agreement, that the city would have to backstop any and all costs? That we didn't anticipate.
That's what our approach would have to be, because we cannot use
Can't
DB.
do anything else.
Absolutely.
The second question I have, Mark said we haven't expended any money on this yet, but you've mentioned meetings and analysis research that Ice Miller has done so far, so it sounds like we have expended some dollars.
Yes, there's a little bit of money we paid to Ice Miller, but it's been pretty inconsequential, a couple $1,000 maybe for a punch list.
Okay. But I have a question on that, which is, there are resources being spent by our organization on this.
Right.
I don't know how much, but even if it's inconsequential, I don't know, I haven't heard articulated any benefit whatsoever to our members as members from doing it. And so my thought was, I need an opinion from either outside counsel or Johnny Tran that tells me we can even talk about this anymore without being reimbursed for the expense by somebody else.
We clearly have a duty of loyalty and care to the defined benefit plan, and so I trust that the trustees recognize that, and we're doing our best to look at this without expending significant amounts of money, but there is some time involved in looking at this. Piggyback with that, we're in looking at the DC plan option, we are recognizing our duty to the defined benefit plan and weighing those concerns as well. So if you would like an opinion on that,
Well,
even to
my thought is, if even though it's inconsequential, that we should have the city's commitment to reimburse for the time as well as for the outlay of any cash, and that we should not spend another minute on it if the city doesn't give us that, not because we need the money, but because we have to do that. That's at least my off-the-cuff, uninformed opinion.
Create some work orders and just accumulate your hours and keep record of them.
We're about at that point right now. As I said, we really can't go any further without getting more city concurrence with what we've identified.
Yeah.
So,
All right. So, Ed, if that concluded your comments.
It does, just to make sure, even though they're inconsequential, I'd like to make sure we're going to reimburse for those, even if we decide not to go ahead.
And so just to put it into context, you see a $30,000 annual charge there related to State Street Bank's plan accounting and units of measurement that they would provide to Wells Fargo to then further break down for the individual members, because we will not keep any individual member records. At the end of the day, that $30,000, if we have $1 million, well, that's a 3% load right there. So I was breaking it out. If we have to get to a quarter point just for the cost for State Street Bank, you're looking at $12 million.
But you're talking about if we go forward with
Bingo.
the plan.
Yes.
And I think what the board is saying is, if we go forward after today to even talk about it further, we need a commitment to reimburse those expenses and time up front, win, lose, or draw. And so I would propose an amendment to the motion that says that the first thing we do is obtain that commitment, and if we don't obtain that commitment, we stop work.
I'm in the queue still.
do you have suggested
Carol.
wording, Val?
Huh?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I will, but I thought we should vet it a little
Sure.
bit more.
I'm not sure I have anything new to add, but I completely agree with everything that's been said here, and feel that we do need to get reimbursed for every resource spent. I was curious who else does it. It sounds like a few people do. I'd be interested a little bit more in what their experience has been, what level of participation they have, and we can have that discussion maybe at a later time. I was curious, do we have any idea how big is the DC plan and what kind of participation would they expect, or is this just something you can't even speculate about?
It's difficult to speculate on that so far, Carol. There are about $1 billion of money spread amongst these 4 plans. And again, you've got, let's say, 15 investment options to put that in right now. So if we rolled this thing out, would we attract 1% of that money, 10% of that money, 50% of that money? I don't know. If you got 10% of the money, it'd be an extra $100 million in addition to the $7 billion that we have. So in limited discussions we've had with Washington and Missouri so far, it's pretty early in their programs. They have not seen a significant movement from former funds into the mutual fund option to invest in the DB plan, so to speak. So it's not been, at least initially, a huge movement, but it's all still preliminary. That's a lot of the basic research work that we haven't done. We've just asked a few questions about how they did it.
So I guess my concern was not just around dollars and cents, but just sort of operationally, if what the scale of it would be and how it might affect the organization in ways we haven't anticipated.
So there are 2 main groups that deal with the DB plan that won't be involved. One is member services, and the second is benefits administration, though we potentially have the chance where somebody who might be a DC plan member calls in, but we would have a script for that item. For us, it would be primarily finance, and we have a monthly investment process that we would expand to include a 4th fund, so to speak, that it would then automate the process. The big time commitment, though, obviously would be on my part to determine that we've dotted our I's and crossed our T's on an annual basis. When we do our annual CAFR, it would be new disclosure requirements, but that would be a learning process. That it's the first time you do something where you spend the most time on it.
Okay.
And then, obviously, as I've talked to Johnny Tran, legal would have their own questions that they would want to have answered over and above the items that we discover in our discussions with Ice Miller and obviously the city.
Okay.
Alan?
So this discussion has been happening for a long time. I remember having retirees approach me a long time ago, and even newer retirees, people about to retire, because our members have drop accounts that they take out of the system when they leave the system. And some of those drop accounts are quite sizable. And those retirees also have an extraordinary amount of faith in the investment staff here at SDCERS, and have mentioned to me, boy, it'd sure be nice if I had a way to keep my money in the system. But there isn't a way for that, the way we're structurally set up. So part of the conversations around this is to create an amendment to the DC plan so that drop accounts can be rolled out of the system back into our current 401k or deferred comp system we have in the city of San Diego.
DB plan?
Yes, when you roll your
You said DC.
Oh, did I say DC? Oh, thank you. So when you roll out of your drop money, you can put it into the DC plan of the city, and now we have a way for those members to invest back in the system that they have so much confidence in. And it's an indirect benefit, but as an institutional investor, that's where we gain our leverage. And as long as we maintain our size or we get bigger, it's my understanding that we get more leverage, and that's how we keep our fees down. So growing the size of our trust fund is a benefit to our current members. It's an indirect benefit. It's hard to quantify sometimes how much of that will benefit, but keeping our money in our system and keeping all of our members together and investing together, I intuitively believe that makes our system better. So I support this. Yes, I'm concerned about the costs, and I'm happy to hear about this metaphorical concrete wall between the DB and the DC, because we cannot put the DB at risk because of this. What I am concerned about is if we are going to draw a very hard line in the sand with the city and say, we're not going to talk to you one more minute unless you absolutely guarantee you're going to reimburse us. I'm concerned about the attitude or the approach that we have to take with our partner, our plan sponsor. I think we've come through some very difficult times with our plan sponsor over the years, and I think we're on a path to mending all those relationships, and I hate to damage that by taking a very hard stance. So, I'm very supportive of this, obviously, but I am concerned about the costs, and I do like the way we calculated the basis points, to cover the admin costs, because I do understand the 45 that we normally have, and then there's going to be a cost going forward to the people also.
And just to be clear, the discussions with the city have been very cordial, so
Right.
there's no
Okay.
issue with respect to that. It is just the fact that when we got to a point where we got numbers, now we have to say, okay, now what would you like to do? We're not saying this is everything. We're not saying that there isn't something unforeseen, but we believe that moving forward will end up costing, and we believe at that point the city should bear those initial startup costs.
Right. So the motion, just to clarify, because we talked about this, the motion is just to give staff the authority to approach and discuss with the city.
Yes.
I'm gonna propose an amended motion in just a moment,
Okay. Okay.
but along those lines.
All right. Well,
All right, so first I'd like to make a couple comments to explain why I'm going to propose this. But as I see it, the DB plan has no time, no staff time, and no money that it can share for the benefit of the city or non-DB plan participants on this. And therefore, 100% of the time and the cost must be reimbursed outside of the DB plan. At least that's what I think, unless council tells me otherwise next month or whenever we get around to this. And I would have an open mind if there's a different point of view on that, because I haven't studied it. That's just my knee-jerk. So I will amend the motion to make that part of it. Secondly, I understand what Alan's saying, and I think he makes a good point, which is there's a lot of interest in this, and we're the right people to look into it. But it may be that in looking into it, what we find out is that it's not feasible, or that it's only feasible on terms and conditions that the city would not find acceptable, because the city would have to guarantee everything, and the city may not accept that. If, through the investigation, we find out that this plan isn't feasible, then we never have to make a judgment call. And for that reason alone, I think the motion is going to be worthy of support. But I do think that we would, if it turns out to be a feasible approach, have to make a judgment call. There is a thriving private industry that does what we're proposing to do. Being a public agency, we have advantages over the private sector in some ways that we can take advantage of. I have a serious question as to whether it would ever be appropriate for a public sector entity like we are to step in and compete with the private sector and use those advantages against taxpayers who are trying to compete in this space, as they say today. So I have a serious problem with the whole concept, but I also understand the notion that our members are entitled to the lowest cost, best product that they can get. And so there are competing interests here, and I'm not sure where I land on this one. It's going to take a lot of thought. But the study that we're maybe about to embark upon could render all of that moot. And for that reason, I support doing the study to at least find out. And so my amended motion would be that the board authorize staff to study the anticipated costs, responsibilities, and legal structure to become a defined, or to create a defined contribution investment option for the city of San Diego, and to share that information with the city upon confirming that all time and expense associated with that study and with the sharing will be fully reimbursed by the city.
prospectively.
Yeah, we want that up front, and then we'll spend the time to do the study. And it's no formal approach. It is sharing information. So that would be my proposal, and I can read that again if you'd like.
Thank you, Val.
All right. So I suggest or move that the Board of Administration authorize staff to study. Then you can pick up with anticipated costs, responsibilities, and legal structure.
Anticipated costs?
Responsibilities and legal
All right,
structure.
okay, so we're going to just take.
To, the only word I would change in the rest of the existing motion is I'd change become to create. because it would be a side-by-side program. We wouldn't become a defined contribution plan. So to create a defined contribution DC investment option for the city of San Diego.
Oh, wait, go back.
It's all in your motion already.
I'm a little bit lost. Okay, hold on. So, motion to approve staff's recommendation to authorize, right? Recommendation.
Take staff's recommendation out.
Okay.
All right, here's where we're going to start. A motion to authorize staff.
Okay. Motion
To study. Okay. Then you pick up with anticipated costs, responsibilities, et cetera.
I'm deleting all this other stuff.
Everything, yeah,
Okay.
up to anticipated costs. It's a motion to authorize staff to study anticipated costs, responsibilities, and legal structure to become a defined contribution investment option for the city of San Diego. Then just go back to become and change that to create.
Okay, for the city of San Diego to. Okay, so a defined contribution investment option for the city of San Diego to become?
Create.
To
No.
create, okay.
Johnny, can you maybe
To
just...
create,
Legal structure to create.
okay.
Okay, all right. And share that information with the city. Upon confirmation that all time and expense will be reimbursed by the city.
I have a couple more.
Okay. Let's get this in and then.
Staff.
Take out to create.
Create instead of become.
Yeah, exactly. So just change become to create. And then change define to defined.
Do you want to clarify that time and expense includes heretofore and going forward? In other words, we've already spent time.
Okay, so past and future time and expense.
At the end,
Prospective.
Future only.
Oh, future,
I don't know that we have we actually incurred any out-of-pocket expense to date, Mark?
Ice Miller.
A little bit with Ice Miller.
Let's go forward.
you just want prospective spending?
No, my motion is all.
Absolutely.
I just don't think we have I don't think even a penny is within our charter. I don't
not.
think we can do it.
It's not.
Even as much as we'd like to, I just don't think we have the power to. I mean, this isn't our money. This is our members' money.
Of course, they're already paying that as part of their ADC payment, but I get your point.
No.
And I get yours.
There isn't
They are
anything that
paying-
we spend that they
that
don't pay us back.
for.
Right.
That's true.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I feel better.
Yeah.
Well,
Our administrative costs are borne by the city, not the
Correct.
member.
Right.
Yeah, not by
Not
the
the trust
members.
fund.
Not by the member.
So does that obviate the need for this?
no. I
Ed,
think
what-
we need to be real clear on this. And I'd like to, I don't know if this needs to be part of the motion, but a few things. I want the cost to cover both direct and indirect costs. I'm not sure we know what our indirect cost burden is, but we have to come up with one. I don't know if staff keep time records now, but I want staff to keep time records when they're working on this, so we have documentation of how much time is being spent. And I think we also need to come up with a minimum dollar investment that's needed to even make this viable. Based upon your $30,000 and the basis points, we may come up and just say, we need a minimum investment of $50 million, for example, and it's not a viable number. So
Right.
we need to know what that is before we even go forward.
The The problem is I'm an accountant, not a marketing major, and so as a result, I have no idea what the pickup would be. But as Alan pointed out, there are different classes of DC plan members. The people that he talked to, I'm assuming, are DB plan members who also have a DC plan option and investment option. In my case, I'm just a DC plan option member. At the end, I don't know if you can set a minimum investment for DC plans, because that's the whole point in the workplace, that there is no minimum.
No. I mean the amount that
The contributions.
the contribution in total that we're going to have here. We need to know what the minimum amount is that we're willing to accept
In order to do this.
to be able to do this. Be it 50 million, be it 100 million, I have no idea. But for it to be viable,
But the question is,
Plus-
how do you guarantee that?
I can't, that's just it.
Well, then
That's part of the study that
That's
may
part of the
result in
study.
infeasibility if we get into the detail.
because if we can't do it, then I'm not going to go ahead with this.
Right.
Right.
So the detail there would be, to make this an effective investment, we would need 20 million, 100 million,
Whatever
a
it is.
million,
Right.
whatever,
Yeah.
in investment to be able to have this fund to be effective.
Right.
An
Because
effective
we're starting from scratch. Vanguard already has their funds, and so I agree with what Ed's saying, but I think that's part of the analysis
Yeah,
that we're authorizing
exactly.
to have done. So
We're not going to know how 8,000 people, whether they choose to invest or not.
I understand that, but we need to know from an institutional standpoint what the minimum investment we need to make this a viable plan for the participants that are thinking of investing into it.
although ultimately that may be a risk for the city, not for us.
And the member,
And the members that choose to put
Not
their
us,
money in it,
right.
and not us. But we might have a subscription requirement that we have to have $10 million before we're going to open it, because otherwise members who put their money in this are going to pay too much.
well,
Exactly.
Well,
The city should
part
care about that.
Yeah.
So, just thinking operationally, it is my belief that there would have to be an upfront, so like, for instance, we talked about Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo is not going to charge a bill up front, but what they were going to do is add a basis point charge to the member's account. So that's something where the member would be paying Wells Fargo's costs. In our case, we know that there are certain upfront hard costs that have to be paid because it can't be absorbed by $0 at that moment in time. I am envisioning, the city fronting those costs, meaning that in essence they're paid for that first year, and including those startup costs, including the other items we're talking about. But, and here's the caveat, at some point in time, the DC Plan Board, the City of San Diego, will evaluate the performance of that investment option to determine whether or not it makes sense to continue. But that would be the city's option to then pull if there's not people investing, et cetera.
Actually, Ed, you're next in the queue, but you may have already spoken,
I have.
and so I think it goes to Dick.
I'd like to repeat a couple of things I've already said, which I think it's important that we start putting these, some things on paper and get it into a place and format that our members can know about it, and our stakeholders and the other plan sponsors knowing what we're doing. And I don't have specifics on how we could do that, but I think it's important because up to now it's all been kind of discussion orally at the board. And I think that again, repeat my recommendation that we ask our advisors, whether it's our investment counsel, our fiduciary counsel, our insurance broker, ask them for first impression issues. I think things are going to pop up that we hadn't thought of. Val raised a policy concern, which I hadn't thought. I thought a lot of issues, but Val raised one about the appropriateness of the public fund competing with the private sector, which is a legitimate issue that somewhere along the road, maybe it's the city's concern, but it could become ours. So I would really encourage staff to reach out to those people in a cost-free way to say, do you see anything that we need to look at as we go down the road? And again, I personally wouldn't, expect Mark to keep a a timesheet on this issue, because I think that as a CEO, he has to remain flexible to have discussions with our plan sponsors and as this thing goes forward. But I do agree that it's important that we separate the cost, including indirect. I think Ed asked about indirect costs, and I think we're going to have to somehow develop what those are, because that's an important part of the load. And the issue we were just talking about, which was the viability of this, if only a few people sign up, and they decide what the load's going to be for those few people, you might not know until too late that the percentage you have to add on just would make it unfeasible. But I think that I know, like Alan, I've been asked by retirees and others, gee, it'd be nice if we had an option, because if you look at our investment performance over the years, it's been really good, and we'd like to do that. And also, I don't know if I'm right on this, but considering that we have a largely closed DB plan, if there are ways to keep monies coming into that plan to grow it, that's going to help us out in terms of having more money to diversify with and so forth. So and certainly there may be other benefits, but I just want us to be real thorough about this and real transparent and go forward. So I support what you recommended, Val, in terms of the revised motion.
Yeah, the revised motion is not as specific as what you were proposing. If you want to propose further amendments to it, you may. But
I don't. I just think that what I mentioned should be part of the study process.
Thank you. Well, we've had a very thorough discussion, and I would invite Mark, if he wants to make any comments before we vote.
I'm supportive of the motion. Again, I believe we have done quite a bit of study on this already. We've approached tax counsel that's come up with not only the tax considerations, but really Ice Miller has advised other states across the country on these plans. It's a pretty all-encompassing list of all the considerations that need to be taken into account. That list will be provided to the city. We've approached our outside insurance broker from a fiduciary point of view to get a perspective on whether we've got any fiduciary insurance cost that would be incremental. They've said that the answer is no, given the amount of money that we're talking about here, and that we're really not taking on plan administration. So we can get Chris Waddell involved in taking a look at it. But really, spending more time on it now here, I think is less crucial than getting together with the city and exploring how these cost dynamics come into play.
Yeah.
So that's really what I'm looking for. It's like we can't go any further. They asked us to look into it. We've looked into it. We've gotten this far. We now need to sit down with the city and say, do you want to do this or not? It's a program they would like to explore for their members, right? It's not something we're pushing. Right?
And this motion doesn't in any way inhibit your ability to sit and talk with the city?
No.
Okay.
No.
But I guess it begs the question that Val and I have been going back and forth. How, if we decide to pull the plug on this, do we get reimbursed for those costs, direct and indirect, and ISMELA, fiduciary counsel? How do we get reimbursed for these costs?
Well, we'll talk with tax counsel about that particular question here and see whether they obviously know we've been spending time on this already, so they've been advising us on how to appropriately comply with tax laws that say our expenses should be for the DB plan only. So we'll work with them and make sure that gets resolved.
On the note of already charging the city for administration expenses separately from the trust fund, wouldn't the city come back and say, we're already paying for you to administer and make phone calls and write memos? Now you're going to ask us for money again to do that? We're already paying you to do that.
Well,
is that?
I understand. There's a little bit of irony to that.
Yes.
And if they pay us now, it means they pay us less later.
Right.
That's
okay.
Right. I want to get paid now
Okay.
more.
Yes, I understand.
Okay.
All right. So I've made the motion, and I'm going to make it formal. And there's a second from Richard Wilkin.
Ready to vote? All votes are in.
And the motion carries unanimously. That brings us to item 5, which is, thank you very much, Ted. That brings us to staff's recommendation to forfeit the account of Peter Nagard, Marcel Rossman.
Good morning. This is, as you said, a request to forfeit the account of Peter Nagard. He became eligible for required minimum distribution on April 15th of 2014. We have been unable to contact him, and we've been unable to contact any other family members to assist us with finding him. So we have forfeited his April 15th, 2014 required minimum distribution. He still has a significant amount of funds in his account, and we are asking for board approval to forfeit the balance of his contributions. This doesn't mean they're gone forever. They go into the reserve of the plan sponsor. If he was to appear later, or his beneficiaries were to appear later, they would appeal to the board and his account would be reinstated. If we don't forfeit his funds, every year we'll have to calculate a required minimum distribution and forfeit that each year until his account is depleted.
So this is just an efficiency.
Correct.
What have we done to contact him?
All we had in Iris was an address, so we've mailed letters to the address which have been returned. We've looked him up in LexisNexis, and we found an address in Arizona that was also returned to us. There are no phone numbers in LexisNexis. He did not have any beneficiaries listed in Iris, so we were unable to contact a spouse or children that way. We also do an internet search. So we've done all of those things and have been unable to contact him.
There used to be something called a skip trace. You familiar
That
with
I'm not familiar with that. That's not part of what is in our board rule, but it's something we can add to it. We have, over the last year, checked LexisNexis on 4 different occasions, hoping that maybe some new information would come up. And we are fairly confident he's not deceased because we haven't been notified by Small World that he is deceased.
Just off the grid.
Off the grid. He separated in 1977. He had about $2,800 in his account at the time.
How old is he?
He's 72 now. So it's 38 years that he's been gone.
He may be deceased.
He may be. It should have been picked up in Small World, but if there's no official record of it, if he moved to a foreign country and passed away there. But the funds do not leave SDCERS, unlike in the private sector where you would just sheet the funds and they would go to the state. They do
Try
stay
Ashley
here.
Madison?
I'm sorry?
What do you know about Ashley Madison? So when you say the funds are credited to the reserve account for the plan sponsor, that's in a reserve account held there at SDCERS in the plan sponsor's name?
Correct.
Okay.
And as I said, if we do find him, he can come and request the funds be returned to him, and they are. The downside is that they stop accruing interest once they're forfeited.
Skip tracers use databases, including credit reports, things like that, Social Security. So I don't know whether it would be worthwhile, but there are professionals who just do this. I take it we don't use their services.
We haven't up to this point, no.
We can look into that.
Yeah.
All right.
Would seem like a fairly routine thing to come to the board on. You know, if someone is over 70 and we can't find them, we have to ask your authorization to forfeit it. We don't have, staff doesn't have authority to do that, which is under current policy why you're being asked to look into it.
We have authority to forfeit just the amounts due to him, which is the amount of his required minimum distributions. But we don't have authority to forfeit the rest.
So I'd like to go ahead and make a motion. At this point, there's no one in the queue. The motion's been seconded by Carol Broad.
Ready to vote?
Motion carries 5-0.
There's one further thing to it I just want to add. He's also been listed with the National Registry of Unclaimed Benefits, so his name is out there if he or his family starts looking for him.
Thank you very much. That brings us to 3 non-action items, starting with semi-annual travel and training report for the first half of the year.
This is your annual report for fees in excess of $50,000.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I skip something?
No,
No, you're in the right one.
we're on 6.
I'm sorry, I skipped it. The semi-annual training and travel report. So this is for January 2015 through June 30th, 2015. Are there any questions?
Wait a minute. We have a motion to
Found Peter
reconsider?
Nagard.
We found him.
Is his middle name Olaf?
Oh. How many Peter Nagards could there be?
It's the right age and everything.
All right. The amateur PIs over here are going to now pay attention to the meeting.
My apologies for Ed's apologies.
Going to move to 7 now?
Yeah, let's, Johnny's report on semi-annual travel and training. There was no comment on that. Let's go on then to item 7.
This is the annual report of fees in excess of 50,000. Any questions, I'll take that. Otherwise, it's a non-action item.
Nice not to see law firms at the top of the list.
Yes.
I don't think the law firms think that.
All right. There's no one in the queue, and there are no action items here. Let's go on to number 8. Marcel Rossman will report on the annual report on overpayments.
Hello again. So this is the annual report that we provide to you of all overpayments that were recovered in the preceding fiscal year, and I'm available to answer any questions you may have.
Some of these are familiar to us. A couple of them
Yes.
may not be, but anybody have any questions or comments on these? All right. Thank you very much, Marcel. That brings us to old business. So stay where you are. Report on overpayments to members exceeding 10,000.
Okay, so before you also have the report on any new overpayments and any recovered overpayments. So we have one new one, Mr. Ruben Hernandez. His situation is he had established reciprocity when he started working for one of our plan sponsors. He, subsequent to establishing reciprocity, withdrew his funds from the reciprocal agency, which means he was no longer entitled to a change in his age rate. So he can cure this by going back to that agency and redepositing the funds. If you look on the members who resolved their overpayments, Mr. Joseph Yamane, that's exactly what he did. He was a member of SDCERS. He established reciprocity, withdrew his funds, which caused an age rate issue. He went back to SDCERS, redeposited the funds, reestablished reciprocity, and cured his overpayment, or underpayment of contributions, I should say.
And has staff gone over this with the member?
We have not discussed this directly with Mr. Hernandez. Once he received the letter from us, he went to Mr. Conger, and so Johnny has had contact with Mr. Conger. We did, however, before we send out a letter that says you owe us anything substantial, we attempt to contact the member. So there was an attempt to contact him. A message was left. He did not respond to that. The letter actually gives him a staff member's name and specific phone number to call. He did not do that either. He went directly to Mr. Conger, who then contacted us.
And at this point, then, we would be explaining to Mr. Conger what Mr. Hernandez could do to reinstate his position, his age rate.
Yeah, Val, that's been explained.
Okay.
And as I understand, Mr. Hernandez has already applied to redeposit his funds with SDCERS.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions?
All right. Thank you very much. That brings us to the status reports, and the first one is for Mr. Tran on legal services and compliance.
Yeah, you've got my status report in front of you. It contains the quarterly settlement and fraud criminal policy report. I can discuss anything in that report if you have a question.
Could you remind us what the basis for the demurrer to the declaratory relief and mandamus causes of action, what the bases were, and just briefly elaborate on Judge Pressman's reasoning for overruling the demurrer on those grounds?
Okay. We're going to talk about this a little bit more in closed session.
Well, then I'll defer it to closed session if we're going to get into that.
Right.
All right. Seeing no one in the queue, we'll move on to David Bond and Information Technology.
Good morning. In addition to my report, I'd like to give an update on the HD upgrade project status. I've reached out to City TV 24 because this is what they do. I'm not an expert in AV equipment, and so they have offered to help us. They are willing to help compile a parts list that matches what they're using over on their side, because we integrate with City TV. Ultimately, our board meetings end up on Channel 24. So we're looking at similar equipment. They will also help me evaluate the technical proposals, which I greatly appreciate. Again, I'm not an expert on AV technology. The potential exists that we can tap into some of the this city's grant funding. So they receive grant funding from cable franchises, and that would be fantastic if we were able to tap into some of that money. So we'll be pursuing that angle as well. And if the board has any further questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I think you tapped out.
Thank you.
That brings us to Cynthia Queen and Member Services.
Good day. Thank you for reading my report. I wanted to note that on the first item I had mentioned a streamlining improvement with our health team regarding an efficiency with COBRA reimbursements. I want to make sure we all understand that the reason COBRA comes into play is because when retirees from the city first leave, one of their options is to utilize COBRA, and a good number of them do because it's cheaper for them. So that's how that works. And at about any given time, we have around 200 people using the COBRA system, but that means they have to seek a reimbursement. So the member would pay the city of San Diego for those first 18 months, and then they'd have to turn around and tell SDCERS and provide proof that they had paid for that. And their question was, don't you two know what you're talking about between each other? So I've been working on that, and I'd like to give kudos to Mia Alomar for making that happen. She worked in partnership with our colleagues over at Risk Management, and they now utilize a shared database to be able to automatically confirm. So after the member's initial proof that they have enrolled in COBRA, for those remaining 17 months, it's an automatic payment. This is a major benefit to members. Even though it's a smaller group of them, this has been a big issue for people. And as far as the staff processing time, it can take up to 15 minutes to process one of these reimbursements. So the processing time went from 7 days down to approximately 2 days. So I'm very pleased with the efforts to streamline our processes, even more importantly, to make things easier for our members.
And I just want to comment on how big of a deal that is, because we had members, married active members, and they had to, the process developed into, they had to show their pay stub every 2 weeks to the system so we can assure that the retiree had insurance. And so this would be a huge improvement. So thank you for working on that and getting that done.
But very pleased that Mia was able to make that happen. Just an example where things have been that way for a long time, but if you look at them with a fresh set of eyes and just put some effort into it, you can really make a difference and just make things work better. So to follow up on the health, we all know that the open enrollment was a great success this year, as it has been, but there's behind-the-scenes work that happens in July, because once the members complete the paperwork to us, that then needs to be completed in the back office here and turned over to the providers before August, as usual. And of course, all of that was done on time, and I wanted to give kudos to the health team who works very hard to make that happen. This year, that included an extra twist, because the MEA group kindly provided the option of having the SHARP health plan be offered to members, but we had to work to make that not be a reimbursement process. Ended up with 91 members enrolling in that, so it was a good pilot year for it. And then a statistic that we had discussed before, I wanted to give an update related to the overall usage of the different types of health plans. We have 87% of our eligible members using the city-sponsored plans, which is similar to what it's been before and what you would expect and hope for with the city sponsoring those plans. The next topic, I wanted to mention a mailing that we sent to about 445 retirees in mid-August. We determined, yes?
I have a question. For the 12% that are collecting reimbursement for other outside health plans, is there a primary motivation or reason for that, so that that really there's nothing we can do to make our plans better for them?
Yes, two items. One is that they may have a spouse who has a better, cheaper coverage, and then the other reason would be that they have found on their own a cheaper coverage. And then you have the whole Medicare element. But in general, they're comparing prices and coverage options.
But if we're reimbursing them versus putting them, they're joining Health Net or Kaiser, their cost is going to be similar or the same either way, isn't it?
The reimbursement amount that is allotted to folks, while it differs, it does not cover all of the city-sponsored plans. It covers some of the Kaiser, but there is an additional out-of-pocket expense. So therefore, that 12% are generally able to find another one where it may be completely covered or is less of an out-of-pocket expense.
I see. Could be out of state.
And we don't, that has no impact on our fund because the city administers,
Pays that.
does plan design, negotiates, they do all of that, so.
But there's a copay, or not, maybe it's a combination of a copay and a portion of the premium that the employee may pay for the Kaiser or the
Right.
Health Net plan.
Members are definitely paying.
But if they seek their own private plan and seek reimbursement, that number may be lower or non-existent.
There would be
They
some that could have
100%
everything
or
paid for.
close to it. Okay.
And I would just note that members are very grateful for the reimbursement piece of that. It definitely gives them options and is widely utilized.
Sorry.
No,
Go ahead.
thank you. Then switching to a mailing that we did to over 400 retirees, we had determined that some folks had a flat tax withholding on their federal taxes, which is not supposed to be the way it is, and we needed to update that. It doesn't have any impact on members' past taxes. We just needed to request them to update it. So we sent out a mailing with some detailed information on how they could do that. Thus far, we've had just over a third of the folks respond and do that, and we'll continue to work with the other folks to ensure that those updates are made and to answer any questions that they have. And then, finally, on outreach to our non-retired members, we are currently mailing out what we call member statements. This shows a snapshot of the account for an active member or a deferred member. You would consider this much like a statement that you would receive from 401k or one of your other many funds that you might have, Val, out there. So this gives you an idea of what is in your account. And this is the best. The thing I want to share about this is that this is an example of our comprehensive approach, and give Jessica Packard some credit for this. Is we're doing, there's a piece that comes in the mail to the member. There is the featured item on the website at the top that explains what this is about and has an awesome video that walks people through the details of the statement and explains what it's about. Then there's the social media piece just to promote it a bit. And the call center is also trained in how to answer any questions. So we just want people to pay attention to what's going on with their account and to make sure that they're aware of what's going on. So what we've been working on is just making sure that all those pieces are working together so that the member gets the best information.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Real briefly, our annual meeting is
October 23rd. Thank you, Jessica. It's coming up. Everyone will be invited to that. We always have a good response from the retirees. We'll be giving an overview of the system and particularly focusing on our fantastic investment returns and reassuring folks of the long-term health of the system. And if there are no other questions, I just want to, on a final note, since this is the member services report, I'd like to serve one of our members, and if we could all just turn this way and wish Johnny Tran a very happy birthday. Happy birthday, Johnny. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Next, Benefits Administration, and once again, Marcel Rossman.
Hello. So you have my report. The only thing that I would like to add to that, I do talk briefly about the audit that Lee conducted of benefit calculations, and wanted to assure you that one of the top things on our list are looking at the few items he identified where we do need to make corrections to members' accounts. Specifically, there was an issue of 13th check payments, and those will all be made by the end of business on Friday, tomorrow. So we are actively looking at the few issues that he did identify that directly affect members' payments. And I'm happy to answer any further questions.
There are no questions. Thank you very much. Next, we have Ted LaSalvia with 4 finance reports.
I'll begin this with our finance staff report. finance staff is current with financial reporting through July of 2015. This is an improvement. I've been here for 2.5 years over what we had done last year, and I continue to try to push the envelope for more timely financial reporting. I'd like to thank Rich Delgado and Rebecca Shee and my GL group for actually helping me get to July when we're not even done with our fiscal year-end audit yet. Our plan sponsors are now implementing GASB 68. Last year we implemented GASB 67. This has caused quite a bit of discussion between myself, our auditors, MGO, their technical partners, and GASB itself, specifically on dealing with certain allocations that one of our plan sponsors, the city, had actually wanted to do to the pension system. Consequently, we've taken the position that the allocation should not be made. The financial statements that I'll be presenting to you shortly has an item on there for OPEB, other pension obligations. This has been traditionally there pre-GASB 67 and 68. Per discussions with our auditors and GASB, we don't believe that it's appropriate to continue those allocations in the future. Hence, for the audit itself, those items will be coming off. They're in my preliminary June financial statements at this time because I'm still awaiting final word from our auditors. Our current focus areas, as you're probably well aware, that DC plan option, more importantly, IRIS, the warranty work related to it, and the system enhancement and testing that will be ongoing into the end of this calendar year. Obviously, those are high priorities for us, and we continue to put resources to that effort. And with that, I will roll into the June preliminary financial statements. These financial statements represent the fully loaded operations of SDCERS. As you were talking to Cynthia Queen about health insurance, you made the note that this is not something that is paid for by the pension system itself. These are costs that are fully reimbursed to SDCERS by the city of San Diego and represent a substantial operations from our staff. Consequently, these financial statements show the full inclusion because we manage our budget. So every year we actually do a fully loaded operational budget, and I thought it appropriate to leave health within these financial statements to give you a full picture as to how SDCERS had done on a fully loaded basis. Turning to the statement of plan net position as of June 30th, 2015, we had net position of $6.8 billion. This is approximately a decrease of $400,000 year over year. When I last presented the May financial statements, we were in a positive territory, but we had deterioration in the month of June. Investments totaled $6.8 billion, an increase of $132 million year over year. This is a decrease from May of 2015 as to what we had. The statement of changes in plan net position for the fiscal year ended June 30th. Total benefit payments and expenses of $466 million were offset by total additions of $466 million. The net loss, so to speak, was about $400,000. Investment income is the most significant difference. In comparison to last year, this year net investment income was $113 million, whereas last year we were actually slightly over $1 billion. In looking at the schedule of reserves, at June 30th, we had total reserves of $5.7 billion. This is an increase of $156 million over the prior year. And once again, these financial statements are unaudited. The primary adjustments to get to the year-end CAFR will be with the removal of the health insurance operations, the removal of the OPEB liability, and also the final fair value adjustments related to real estate, private equity, and the infrastructure investments. And with that, I'll open the floor to any questions you may have. Next.
How have we done over the last couple of weeks?
I'm sorry? Well, if you don't ask me about August yet, so that's when the decline
That's
actually.
news discussion.
Yeah. I'd like to talk briefly about the June 30th budget versus actuals to give you an idea where we wound up the system on a fully loaded basis. Year-to-date, total actual expenses were $43.4 million, based upon an FY15 budget of $46.8. In total, we were 7% under plan. Administrative expenses were $13.3 million, 8% under the $14.5 million budget. Salaries and fringe were $7.4 million. We were 6% under budget due to open positions, primarily in business and benefits administration. Legal expenses, as you well know, were really down last year due to lower than expected costs with the PSC cases. IT expenses were $1.9 million, 5% below the $2 million budget. Pension system support was slightly higher due to the support of 2 systems for part of the fiscal year. The increase in support, though, was offset by a larger, lower technical support labor costs, professional services, and computer hardware supplies. Dave does a good job of managing his costs. General operations expenses are $3.7 million, or 6% higher than budget, primarily due to the under-budgeted depreciation. That's been something I've explained every quarter. We have higher office operation expense, slightly higher due to demands and member services related to the IRIS implementation and the backfile scanning project that we have going on within the organization. Rent and disability processing expenses were on budget, and we had increases to board travel and training for the full fiscal year. Investment management expenses were $30.1 million, approximately 7% under plan based upon the $32.3 million budget. Lower than expected investment management fees. We have what we call a gross-up expense. These are items that we don't pay directly but are taken directly by the fund managers, so it's consequently an increase to an income account and offset by an increase to management fees. The actual timing of real estate fees, our investments, occurred later in the year than originally anticipated, resulting in lower management fees there. And then, of course, the actual market performance being less than the 7.25 that we'd actually budgeted as of the beginning of the fiscal year. Capital expenditures were $1 million for the IRIS project compared to an FY15 total budget of $1.2 million. What happened is that we have a holdback payment that is now being advanced into FY16, primarily due to the completion of the warranty work which will occur here in FY16. We had several minor projects that were all completed by year end. And with that, I will open the floor to any questions you might have on the budget itself.
The overrun on the audit expense?
Yes. That was related to the GASB 67 work that was actually paid for at the beginning of, towards the end of the calendar year. What had happened is that at the time when we budgeted for the audit itself, we didn't have the estimate for the GASB 67 work. And this is something Lee had addressed.
I had a quick question on budget administration. So we're under budget by 7%. That doesn't create any type of a excess revenue for next budget year. Those are all directly credited and billed back to the city, correct?
When you say credited, what happens is that we obviously, I don't know how the city rolls this up into their particular budget document. We obviously manage to our budgeted numbers so that if we come in, but there is no carry forward to the next fiscal year.
Yeah. So it's not like the city budget where if they're under revenue, they have this lump of money they can now roll into next year's one time or rebudget or a reserve or something else.
No, we follow full accrual accounting, and it's a little bit more like the private sector accounting than the governmental accounting for states and municipalities. Gives them more flexibility with encumbrances and reserves that we don't do.
We don't have.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, thank you.
This year's closed. Nothing carries forward to the next year.
Right. So there's no extra money that goes into the trust fund or charged to the trust fund?
No.
Right.
It would be nice.
But we can brag to the city that they saved some money.
We're under budget and we saved the city some money.
So,
the final item, obviously, is the July financial statements. These are obviously unaudited and do not reflect any audit adjustments for the June 30th financial statement audit. They once again reflect the full operations of SDCERS, but there is no OPEB liability because I have taken that off in anticipation of what I need to do for the audit.
that's all we need to cover on July financials.
Okay. With that, if you folks have any questions, we'll just roll through the year, and when I get to August,
We'll hear about August later.
yes,
All right.
much later.
Thank
Only a month.
you. Ted.
Thank you.
That leads us to questions and comments from the chair, trustees, and staff. There being none, we get to the non-docket items. There are none, so we get to closed session.
Yeah,
So
we have
why
one
don't we
close.
adjourn into closed session at this point?
I missed her reaction.
Oh, she got it.
Val caught me. Ready.
All right. So we're back in session for the report out from closed session. There's nothing to report out from closed session, so at this point, unless there are any further questions or comments, I'll adjourn the meeting. Meeting adjourned.